There is a lot to consider. Solo's case, the comparisons with the NFL and the NFL policy. Is that comparison fair? Is there a double standard? Let's say good evening to Kate Fagan of ESPNW.com, who's written extensively on this topic. Roland Martin is managing editor of TV One's News One Now. Steve Cohen joins us on the phone. He covers sports for SeattlePI.com. And with us via Skype, Matt Yoder, the managing editor of AwfulAnnouncing.com. We've got a lot to talk about. Thank you all for joining us. Kate, you have written that this talk of comparison, the NFL discipline, principally Ray Rice and all the other cases, and the Hope Solo issue, which has percolated in the last 10 days or so, is, in your words, in your column, walking down a dead end. Why is that?
Well, I am of the belief that U.S. soccer should put Hope Solo on a leave of absence until her November case. But I think it's a false equivalence to compare her to Ray Rice. And here's why. Now, yes, women do commit a small percentage of domestic violence incidents in this country, but I don't think that we can really get anywhere when we dive into that, because I think the NFL is actually where the power structure is at play that relates to society. I think if you look at the NFL, you're going to see men in charge, you're going to see underreported, underpunished incidents of domestic violence. I don't think that Hope Solo really stands for anything. She's not a lens to dive into any key issue. There is no power structure in place that enables women. So if we're going to move this conversation forward, if we're going to address the issues of domestic violence, we need to address the power structure. And I think the NFL is the mirror into that. You can see the direct correlations in the NFL. And I think with the case with Hope Solo, it's an anomaly. I think it's the exception that proves the rule.
Roland, I see you shaking your head.
No, the reason I disagree with that, because the National Domestic Hotline says in their lifetime, 1 in 4 women are going to be physically assaulted by a partner. 1 in 7 men. Okay, so we can't distance that. We saw a few months ago how in this country we made jokes of Solange attacking Jay-Z in an elevator. If it was reversed, there would be no jokes made about it. The point is this here. This has trickled down beyond the NFL. You have Chad Frazier, the leading scorer for the University of Alabama Birmingham basketball team, kicked off because domestic violence with a volleyball player. Point guard, University of Texas. This is now going into the high schools and junior high schools. We have a problem, okay, where we have men who are assaulting women. We have women who are assaulting men. We have a domestic violence problem in this country. And so I think to only say it's about focusing on power structure, I think misses it. This is also a question of DAs, prosecutors, judges. It goes beyond that. We saw how this country, we spent all this time talking about Ray Rice, but we were ignoring a federal judge, Mark Fuller, who beat his wife, who got pretty much a plea deal, who's a federal judge, lifetime appointment. What I'm saying is broaden this beyond the NFL to say America has a domestic violence problem. Period.
Well, there's certainly no arguing with that, and not Steve Cohen. Certainly, public opinion has somewhat of a voice here, but you're looking for leadership on this issue. Let's get the Seattle-centric view. This all happened over the summer, June, July. She continued to play with the Seattle Reign, of course, with the U.S. national team. What's been the reaction locally?
You know, Bob, there wasn't much of a reaction locally after the initial headlines. I don't think there was a lot of outcry. It's really come up this week in the wake of the Ray Rice scandal. And there were a couple pieces by the Washington Post first and USA Today that kind of brought up the comparisons to the Ray Rice situation. And I think that's where we have started to see some discussion. We had a reader poll on a post that we had earlier this week asking whether or not U.S. soccer should suspend Hope Solo, and actually 83% of our readers voted yes. So I think that people are starting to talk about it now, and I think there is a rather unified voice behind the issue.
Matt, you've got an interesting piece up online currently at AwfulAnnouncing.com talking about the media's influence on this. What have you noticed about the ebb and flow, Matt?
Basically, Bob, we can pinpoint when the national media really started paying attention to this Hope Solo story, and it was September 19th. That's when you see the spike in Google searches. You see the spike in attention and blog posts being paid to Hope Solo, and that's because there were 2 articles posted at the Washington Post and the New York Times that basically asked the same question. Why aren't we paying attention to Hope Solo and these domestic violence charges? And right now, Bob, I think it's come about because you see a void in covering the domestic violence scandal in the NFL. Ray Rice, Greg Hardy, Adrian Peterson. None of them are currently active with their teams. Jonathan Dwyer was deactivated. So now when you look at Hope Solo's story through this new lens of the NFL's domestic violence crisis, yeah, it maybe doesn't make sense that she is still playing and setting records representing the national team while she is undergoing her own domestic violence charges. But it's fascinating, Bob, to see that the media has really led and driven this story to the national scene to the point where you have Sunil Gulati state to USA Today and Christine Brennan that they take domestic violence very seriously. Christine Brennan was one of the few voices covering this story a month ago, basically asking those questions. At the time, U.S. Soccer, a spokesperson said to her that, well, it's a personal situation that Hope is dealing with. So I think the Ray Rice story and what's happening in the NFL has totally transformed the way that we view this Hope Solo story.
We should note, I guess you want to do note for the record, Roland, just for a second, we did invite U.S. Soccer Federation to be a participant in today's program, and they declined our invitation. Roland?
Bob, this is the biggest mistake I think we can make. We should not be saying, is it comparable? Because when you talk about domestic violence, look, you have the case of the running back for the Carolina Panthers, Fred Lane, who was shot and killed by his wife, who went to prison. So you have folks who are murdered, folks who are severely beaten. You have first degree, second degree, third degree, fourth degree. And so you have different, from a legal point of view, they have different classifications. And so I don't say Hope Solo is comparable to Ray Rice. But you just saw Lieutenant Governor of Nebraska resign because he got into an altercation with his sister. And so you have family domestic violence. You have domestic violence among loved ones. And so I don't say comparable. What I say is if we want to discuss domestic violence and broaden it, let's actually talk about it and deal with it as opposed to saying, well, she is the same as him. No, I don't play that game. It's domestic violence, period. There are different degrees.
Well, you say it's a blanket term, domestic violence, but Kate, I've become somewhat familiar with the thinking of U.S. Soccer in making their decision to allow Hope Solo to play. And I think inherent in their decision is their differentiation that there are different kinds, different types in their mind of domestic violence. Do you accept that?
Well, yeah, that's a really tricky road to go down because
yes,
I think a lot of domestic violence in this country is not as cut and dry as what we saw in the Ray Rice video. So I absolutely see, you were making the distinction earlier. Is this an alcohol-fueled family fight? I mean, if you read Hope Solo's memoir, she actually says that has happened a lot in her family, but it's so tricky to try and parse out that difference. And that's why I absolutely say that she should take a leave of absence. I'm concerned about the fact that we are getting distracted now from the core issue, which is that 85% of perpetrators of domestic violence are men, and the power structure that enables that in society is mirrored in the NFL. And now we have distracted ourselves and we're pointing the spotlight at Hope Solo, which I don't think is going to get us anywhere.
Is that fair to her, by the way?
Is
that fair to her? Because nothing materially has changed factually in her case from June and July when the Seattle Reign allowed her to play, when the U.S. Soccer Federation, as late as August before the scrutiny of the Rice case came up to a real high level. Is this fair to her?
Well, in addition, I would say, no, we don't cover women's sports in this country. Now, certainly we do at ESPN often, and I write about women's sports a lot. But there's a lot of people out there who don't watch the U.S. women's national team, don't know who Hope Solo is, and now all of a sudden she's dragged into this conversation, and people will say, well, we have to include women's sports in this conversation, or we're marginalizing it again. But once again, we're not covering women's sports. We are dragging it into a men's sports issue. This was an issue about male athletes and the NFL.
Okay, why can't we do both? Why can't we as the media walk and chew gum at the same time? Why can't we say, wait a minute, we can cover multiple stories? See, this is the point I'm making. The media, national media,
Who's covering women's sports, though?
No. But follow me here.
Who's covering women's sports?
The national media for days said, oh, we're focused on the NFL. We can't talk about Mark Fuller, who's a federal judge. I'm saying we can do both. And here's the other deal. The WNBA, there are those of us who watch that. Shamika Holdsclaw, okay? a couple of years ago when she bust out the window of her girlfriend's car, fired a gun into the SUV. She was facing 6 charges, 65 years. The point is this here. If we're going
to get into making lists about female athletes versus male athletes, those lists are not even going to be comparable. I don't think it makes sense.
Hey, I'm not. You're talking to somebody who for 13 years has been caring for 2 nieces because my sister was beaten by her husband. So domestic violence to me is real personal. And what I'm saying is that somebody who has talked to athletic directors, who talked to men and women, we are seeing in this country a situation of violence in relationships. And so what we must do as the media, we must be willing to say we can cover Ray Rice and Hope Solo and Mark Fuller and other cases, because if we only make it about the NFL, then we frankly are doing a disservice to America.